The point I would like to make is one that he has referred to several times, including his toast a few minutes ago, and that is our belief that Africans are completely able to resolve their own differences in Africa as it relates to political and military encounters, and the intrusion of outside forces into African disputes can only aggravate them and exaggerate the death and suffering of people.
From March 31 to April 3, 1978, President Jimmy Carter of the United States visited Nigeria. This official visit was made by Carter to strengthen U.S. relations with African nations, discuss critical issues like African liberation movements, and promote U.S. interests on the continent. Carter was the first sitting U.S. president to visit Nigeria, underscoring the strategic importance of the country as a regional power in Africa. The president was hosted by the Nigerian military head of state, Lieutenant General Olusegun Obasanjo in Lagos, the then capital city of Nigeria. However, in October 1977, Obasanjo had visited Carter in Washington, D.C. 5 months later, the U.S. president would return the favor. Obasanjo's visit to the United States in 1977 was a diplomatic success, reinforcing Nigeria's leadership role in advocating for African unity and independence during a critical period in the continent's history. His visit deepened Nigeria-US relations and set the stage for President Carter's reciprocal visit to Nigeria the next year. Carter arrived in Lagos on March 31, 1978. He was warmly welcomed by General Olusegun Obasanjo along with other senior officials. An official reception ceremony was held underlining the significance of this visit, which marked the first time a sitting US president had visited Nigeria. Carter's arrival underscored Nigeria's growing importance in US foreign policy and its leadership role on the African continent. On the second day, Carter engaged in formal discussions with General Obasanjo. Their talks centered on several key issues, including the decolonization of Southern Africa, particularly in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, Namibia, and South Africa, Nigeria's leadership in the anti-apartheid struggle, expanding economic and diplomatic ties between the US and Nigeria, and US support for African liberation movements and human rights. Carter also met with other high-ranking Nigerian officials to explore potential cooperation, particularly in the oil and energy sectors, giving Nigeria significance as a major oil producer. In addition, the US president delivered public speeches during the day, emphasizing his administration's commitment to human rights, democratic governance, and the principle of majority rule in Southern Africa, themes that aligned closely with Nigeria's foreign policy objectives. On the third day, President Jimmy Carter attended various cultural events that showcased Nigeria's rich artistic and cultural heritage, fostering greater understanding and goodwill between the two nations. The cultural diplomacy during this part of the visit highlighted the importance of people-to-people ties and mutual respect between the United States and Nigeria. Carter also visited several important landmarks in Lagos and participated in events that honored Nigeria's historical and political significance, as well as its growing influence in both African and international affairs. On April 3, 1978, the last day of the visit, a farewell ceremony was held. During the event, Carter reaffirmed the United States' commitment to working with Nigeria on key regional and global issues. After completing his engagement, President Jimmy Carter departed Nigeria, bringing the historic visit to a close. Olusegun Obasanjo responded to President Jimmy Carter's 1978 visit with a combination of warmth, diplomatic pragmatism, and cautious optimism. Obasanjo, a military leader with a strong commitment to Nigeria's foreign policy goals in Africa, saw the visit as an important moment to strengthen Nigeria's relationship with the United States and to advance key African issues, particularly the fight against apartheid and support for African liberation movements. Obasanjo warmly welcomed President Carter, recognizing the symbolic significance of the first visit by a sitting US president to Nigeria. The visit reflected Nigeria's growing influence in Africa and internationally, which Obasanjo capitalized on to project Nigeria as a leader in the continent's struggle for political and economic independence. During the discussions with Carter, Obasanjo pressed for stronger US action against apartheid in South Africa and more robust support for African majority rule in Rhodesia and Namibia. Obasanjo made it clear that while Carter's rhetoric on human rights was appreciated, Nigeria and other African nations expected the US to take a firmer stance on these issues. He likely expressed disappointment at the limited US sanctions against the apartheid regime, though he did not publicly criticize Carter. General Obasanjo viewed the visit as an opportunity to build a strategic partnership with the US, but he remained cautious about over-reliance on American support, given the US's complex interests in Africa, particularly during the Cold War. Obasanjo understood that while Carter's administration showed a greater interest in African affairs and human rights compared to previous US administrations, American policies were often shaped by Cold War considerations. Thus, Obasanjo's response was measured. He expressed optimism about strengthening ties with the US, but remained aware of the limitations of US commitments to Africa. In the matters of economic cooperation and non-aligned movements, Obasanjo welcomed US interests in Nigeria's oil sector, but also sought American investment in agriculture, infrastructure, and industry. At the same time, the Nigerian head of state reinforced Nigeria's role within the non-aligned movement, which advocated for countries to remain independent of the Cold War rivalry between the US and the Soviet Union. Obasanjo maintained Nigeria's position of non-alignment, balancing relations with both Western and Eastern blocs while pursuing Nigeria's own national and regional interests. Obasanjo used Carter's visit to reaffirm Nigeria's leadership role in Africa, especially through its involvement in the Organization of African Unity (OAU) and its stance on African unity and self-determination. He likely stressed Nigeria's commitment to supporting African nations in their struggles against colonialism and apartheid. Obasanjo saw Carter's visit as an opportunity to build a long-term, mutually beneficial relationship between Nigeria and the United States. He sought to leverage Nigeria's importance as a regional power and an oil-rich nation to secure more favorable terms of trade and investment from the US, while also maintaining Nigeria's independence in international affairs. However, the influence of Carter's visit may have caused Obasanjo to hand over an American-styled presidential system of government to the Second Republic in 1979, instead of the parliamentary system of the First Republic. Interestingly, Carter would not be the last US president to visit Nigeria. In August 2000, President Bill Clinton visited Nigeria, met with Obasanjo, who was this time a civilian president, and addressed the National Assembly. Also, his successor, President George W. Bush, visited Nigeria about 3 years later in July 2003. Obasanjo remains the only Nigerian head of state to have hosted 3 sitting US presidents in the nation's history. So, what happened to Carter after visiting Nigeria? After leaving Lagos, President Jimmy Carter made a brief stopover in Monrovia and met with President William R. Tolbert Jr. of Liberia. Later that year, on September 17, 1978, Carter brokered the Camp David Accords, a pair of political agreements signed by Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin following 12 days of secret negotiations. It was Carter's greatest diplomatic achievement, which led to a peace agreement between Egypt and Israel, ending decades of conflict between the two nations. Due to this agreement, Sadat and Begin shared the 1978 Nobel Peace Prize. A major blow to Carter's presidency came in 1979 with the Iran hostage crisis, in which 52 American diplomats and citizens were held hostage for 444 days after the Iranian Revolution. His administration's inability to resolve the crisis significantly undermined his presidency and contributed to his defeat in the 1980 election by Ronald Reagan. After leaving office, Carter embarked on an extraordinary post-presidential career, arguably achieving more lasting influence through his humanitarian and diplomatic efforts than during his time in office. In 1982, he founded the Carter Center, an organization dedicated to advancing human rights, promoting peace, and tackling issues such as disease eradication and election monitoring around the world. 20 years later, in 2002, Carter would receive a Nobel Peace Prize for his decades of untiring efforts to find peaceful solutions to international conflicts, to advance democracy and human rights, and to promote economic and social development. On October 1, 2024, President Jimmy Carter clocked the centenary age of 100 and is the longest-lived former U.S. president. Since President Gerald Ford died in 2006, he has been the earliest-serving living former president. In 2012, he overtook Herbert Hoover as the longest-retired president. Jimmy Carter became the first living president to celebrate both his inauguration and his post-presidential 40th anniversary in 2017 and 2021. Carter, who was 92 years old at the time, was the oldest former president ever to attend the US presidential inauguration, that of President Donald Trump, in 2017. He surpassed George H.W. Bush, who passed away a few months earlier at 94 years, 171 days, to become the longest-lived US president on March 22, 2019. Carter stated in a 2019 interview that he never thought he would live as long as he had and that a good marriage was the best explanation for his longevity. Jimmy Carter got married to Rosalind Smith on July 7, 1946. On October 19, 2019, the Carters became the longest-wed presidential couple, overtaking George and Barbara Bush. On July 7, 2023, the couple celebrated their 77th wedding anniversary. The long marriage ended with the death of the former First Lady Rosalind Carter on November 19, 2023. She was 96.